President.
Senator from Connecticut is recognized.
Mr. President, as you know, we are at an unprecedented moment in the history of the Senate. There are hundreds of brave, courageous leaders in our military who are being denied promotions, being denied the rank that they deserve because of the actions of Senator Tuberville and Senate Republicans. And Senator Tuberville was down on the floor just moments ago defending his actions. I think most Americans believe that his hold on all of these promotions is indefensible. But what probably won't get covered is an additional idea that he presented to the Senate in his remarks. Senator Tuberville said today that he thinks that our military leadership should be fired for failing to defeat the Taliban. That's pretty extraordinary. For those of us who have served in the Senate and in the House during the time that we've been in Afghanistan, we had the opportunity to see that mission on the ground. It was a difficult, hard mission. Some might say it was an impossible mission, badly under-resourced right from the beginning. But the idea that our soldiers or our military leadership, captains, lieutenant colonels, generals, should be fired because they couldn't perform a mission that was likely impossible, that, frankly, will have an even bigger chilling effect than Senator Tuberville's hold on military promotions. There's no doubt that there should be consequences for gross negligence on the job in any profession, including the military. But for any of us who saw the work being done in Afghanistan, our military, from the top down, they were doing the best they could under difficult circumstances. Refusing military promotions apparently isn't cruel enough. Now Republicans want military leaders fired when they can't complete impossible, under-resourced missions. This is a growing attack, a growing set of attacks on our military, and all in the service of a bunch of old men telling young women what health care they can get and what health care they can't get. Mr. President, I'd like the following remarks recorded as separate in the record.
Objection.
Mr. President, in May of 2019, Layla Hernandez had her quinceañera. She was in a bedazzled green gown. She looked absolutely magnificent. She was having a great sophomore year in high school. She was playing basketball, number 23. She had a lot of friends. One friend said that Layla was just one of these people full of joy and happiness. She knew how to make somebody's bad day turn into a good day. In September of that year, 2019, Layla went to a car dealership in the Midland-Odessa area of Texas. Her 18-year-old brother, Nathan, was buying a truck, and this was a big deal for this family. And so I don't know if it was the whole family, but her mom was there, Nathan was there, she was there, her 9-year-old brother was there. And I believe as they were emerging from the dealership, they heard gunshots. Her mother took the younger brother, the 9-year-old, and they ducked underneath a car. Nathan, 18, all he could do is just wrap his hands around Layla. But the shooting was relentless. Nathan was hit in the arm, but Layla was hit closer to the neck. Layla's last words in the embrace of her brother were, "Help me, help me." She was one of 7 who died in the Midland-Odessa mass shooting. 32 people were shot. A lot of them, like Nathan, survived, many with injuries that will impact them for the rest of their life. But Layla Hernandez, just a few months from her quinceañera, died that day. The young man who shot her was ineligible to own a weapon. He had serious mental illness, serious enough that he was on the list of individuals who was prohibited from buying a weapon. He had tried to buy a weapon, but he had been denied when he tried to do it at a licensed gun dealer. He is one of millions of Americans who have been stopped from buying a gun because they're a felon or they are seriously mentally ill. But this young man was still able rather easily to get a weapon. Why is that? Well, it's because many of our weapons in this country are sold without background checks. What happened in this case? How did this young man with a serious history of mental illness get his hands on a powerful weapon that allowed him to kill Layla and 6 others? Well, the story runs through a man named Marcus Braziel. Marcus Braziel was a gun dealer. No doubt he was a gun dealer. He might not have had a bricks and mortar store, but Mr. Braziel was regularly selling guns. In a 3-year period of time, he bought 90 some odd guns, resold 70 of them. In the court papers that were part of his arrest and conviction, he admitted that he routinely bought firearm firing mechanisms, termed lower receivers, used milling equipment to build them into full-fledged guns, and then sold the completed weapons, each one for a profit of about $100, $200. He listed his firearms on armslist.com, and then he conducted the sales in a parking lot of a local sporting goods store, or sometimes out of his garage. He was a gun dealer, but he never performed background checks because he didn't get licensed. And when he advertised a weapon online, Seth Ator, prohibited from buying a gun at a bricks and mortar store, answered the ad, bought the weapon, and used it to kill Layla Hernandez and shoot 32 other people. This, unfortunately, is not the exception. This is, in America, the rule today. 22% of gun owners report that they obtained their weapon without a background check. And an analysis of gun sale ads from 2018 to 2020 revealed that the majority of those ads were being placed by people like Mr. Braziel, unlicensed sellers, not required to do background checks. And so what that means is that there are tens of thousands of guns, perhaps more, in this country every single year being not just sold without background checks, but being sold to individuals who are prohibited from buying those weapons. Because that's exactly where those people go. People like Seth Ator, the shooter in Midland-Odessa, they know that this black market exists. They know that there are people on armslist.com who will willingly sell them weapons without a background check. So when they get stopped from buying a gun at a gun store, they go and buy one online. That's the bad news. The good news, Mr. President, is that Republicans and Democrats in the Senate and the House recognized this problem. And as part of the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act last year, we updated the definition of a gun dealer to make it crystal clear that people like Mr. Braziel need to get a license and they need to conduct background checks. What we did is to basically clarify that it doesn't need to be your full-time job. But so long as you are selling guns predominantly for a profit, You have to get licensed. You have to perform background checks. The Biden administration 2 weeks ago released a draft rule implementing that change that we voted for on a bipartisan basis in the Senate. And an analysis of the statutory change that we voted for and the rule that the Biden administration has proposed suggests that up to 328,000 additional dealers could be required to perform background checks. Now, even if those dealers are only conducting a handful of sales a year, and most of these are probably conducting dozens of sales a year, either at gun shows or online on sites like armslist.com, we're talking about millions of guns that right now are being sold outside the background check system that will now be sold inside the background check system. And that's a big deal because that shooter in Midland, he's not the exception. Like I said, unfortunately, he's the rule. And so by having so many more guns go through the background check system and really closing off the ways that felons, criminals, people with serious mental illness can buy guns, you are saving lives. Maybe Layla Hernandez, who would be alive today, she probably would be if this rule had been in place and Mr. Brazil had looked at that definition and come to the conclusion that he needed to get licensed. Admittedly, today, the definition is a little fuzzy. And without a rule making it clear what constitutes being a dealer and what does not, it's even harder for individuals out there to decide whether they need to be licensed or not. Now, Mr. Brazil's case was a pretty clear one. He obviously should have known that he was a gun dealer. That's why he got prosecuted and put in jail for the actions that led up to the murder of Layla Hernandez. But many other Americans may not know that they need to be licensed. Now, with this rule that the Biden administration has put forward, they will know, and they will get licensed. And so I hope that my colleagues will learn about this rule, that my Republican colleagues will understand how far it goes and how far it does not go. This does not mean that an individual who's just selling a gun to a family member is going to have to get licensed. That individual is not a dealer. It doesn't mean that someone who is just liquidating their collection of firearms has to be licensed. That person is not a gun dealer. And the rule makes it very clear who is a dealer based upon their desire to earn a profit, based upon whether they have the trappings of a business, based upon the places that they're selling weapons, where they're more likely to be strangers who they would need to have a background check to understand whether they're selling to a responsible individual. Those people have to be licensed, but there are lots of people who are selling 1 or 2 or 3 guns a year who likely don't have to be licensed under this rule. And so I hope my colleagues will do their own research, not just listen to the spin of advocacy groups, because I think if you do your own research, you'll find out that this is exactly what Americans want us to be doing. They want us to be making sure that when there are commercial transactions of weapons, there's a background check. And by the way, the background check takes 5 minutes. When it doesn't take 5 minutes, that generally is for a reason that the individual likely has a more complicated mental health or criminal history that has to be unwound. So I'm really excited for the Biden administration's very appropriate steps to implement this provision of the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. And I will just finally note that it is the latest in a series of announcements making clear that the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act has had a substantial and important impact. Since the passage of the BSCA, almost 1,000 transactions of weapons to young buyers, those under 21, have been denied. We put in place an enhanced background check for 18, 19, and 20-year-olds when they're buying rifles, assault weapons. And that additional background check has already identified 1,000 people all across the country, young people, who would have gotten a weapon if not for the enhanced background check, but we found out that they actually did have a disqualifying record, a serious mental illness or a undiscovered criminal conviction, and they didn't get the weapon. That's really good news. Second, more than 100 defendants all across the country have been charged with new BSCA violations of gun trafficking. Gun trafficking wasn't a federal crime until we passed that law. Now it is, and over 100 cases have been brought against defendants for violations of trafficking firearms. Prosecutions against unlicensed dealers, even before the Biden administration's announcement of the rule, were up by 52%. And lastly, the administration has made 49 awards for red flag incentive grants, $231 million. And those funds have helped states implement existing red flag laws, but we stood here on the Senate floor and said, we bet you states are going to pass new red flag laws or stronger red flag laws, in part because of the money that they're getting from the federal government. That's exactly what happened just in the last year. Michigan, Colorado, Minnesota, to name 3 states, have passed new red flag laws or strengthened existing red flag laws and will now have additional resources to get the job done. The Bipartisan Safer Communities Act doesn't do everything we need to do. It's not even close. We need to have universal background checks. We need to get these assault weapons off the streets. But we did show that Republicans and Democrats can step up and make meaningful changes in the law to protect people from gun violence. The Biden administration's rule implementing the change in the definition of a gun dealer is going to mean that millions of gun sales that 2 years ago were made without a background check are now done with a background check. That means a lot fewer dangerous people get weapons in this country. That's good news for everybody. I yield the floor.